Hi everyone, I'm Jamie Batch, your instructor for AMP2. We are starting off our lecture on metabolism and energetics. This chapter is very detailed. You're going to be learning this material at a much higher level than you've learned it in the past. I know from teaching this class many times that the majority of my students have, for lack of a better term, kind of faked their way through metabolism. I'm talking about the citric acid cycle and glycolysis and all of that. You've kind of learned enough to get by in previous courses. I'm generalizing here. That's the majority of my students, not everybody. So in this chapter, you can't really get away with that. Not to mention your unit exam is 50% this chapter. So it's really important that you take a lot of time, really let this sink in. I'll do my best, like I always try, to give you some study hints and clues and things like that to help you with the material. So let's go ahead and get started right away. Metabolism in the scientific world is very different than metabolism in everyday life. We tend to use the word metabolism in our everyday life to talk about how quickly we gain weight. Oh, as I'm older, I can't eat as many, cupcakes because it goes straight to my thighs. Or, oh, I can't eat pizza anymore. I can't eat carbs anymore because my metabolism isn't what it used to be. Well, in that context, the word metabolism is really only referring to the catabolism that is only half of the real definition of metabolism. So metabolism as a whole is all of the chemical reactions in your body. In our everyday life, we tend to only refer to the breaking down piece of metabolism, not the anabolism, which is the building up piece. So you have catabolism and anabolism, or anabolism, however you like to put the emphasis. So cellular metabolism is the specific reactions that are within our cells. So we're going to get into overall body metabolism as well as cellular metabolism in this chapter. So the metabolic turnover that is in our body and in our cells is the process of breaking down and replacement, this kind of recycling of organic material that's happening over and over and over in all of our cells as our plasma membranes are continually being renewed and replaced by the Golgi, right? If you remember back to some of those cellular mechanisms, and as our proteins are being reused and recycled and broken down, right? Remember hemoglobin, right? Being recycled, all of these things that we've kind of mentioned along the way will all start to make a little bit more sense between this chapter and the next couple of chapters. So the only thing that's not recycled in our cells is the DNA, right? Because the DNA is maintained in the nucleus, unless the cell has been broken down for whatever reason, and then the subunits of DNA are recycled. So cells basically get all of these little building blocks to create proteins and to create lipids and to create energy molecules. They get those ingredients from the catabolic reactions that occur. So they are coming basically from the organic materials that we're bringing into our body, such as the nutrients from our food as well as the oxygen from our respiratory tract. So all of the ingredients or building blocks, as we like to say, for these necessary molecules are coming from our respiratory and digestive systems. So our respiratory and digestive systems basically provide what we call a nutrient pool. And the cells can kind of say, you know what, I need some of that and some of that and some of that because I need to make some lactose, right? Or I need to make some glycogen, or I need to make some, peptidase or whatever. So all of these little ingredients that you're bringing into your body are broken down by that digestive tract, transported to cells through the bloodstream, and then the cells are picking and choosing what they need from this nutrient pool, and then they're assembling the structures that they do need. So let's talk about catabolism or aerobic metabolism. This is occurring specifically in the mitochondria of our cells. The majority of the energy that is produced from catabolic reaction, so from physically breaking down the glucose or breaking down the lipids, the majority of that energy is lost as heat in our bodies. That's how we're generating our body heat. That's how we're maintaining our stable body temperature. 40% of that energy is captured in the form of a chemical bond on the molecule ADP to form ATP. It's adenosine diphosphate that is converted into adenosine triphosphate. This ATP is used for anabolic activities all throughout the body, as well as cellular functions like the sodium-potassium pump, right? Like the synthesis of DNA. All of that requires energy. That energy is obtained from the ATP energy molecule for the most part. So again, the majority of the energy from your cells from your cellular metabolism is lost as body heat. So let's talk about this kind of overall view that we're getting here. And this diagram is a great diagram to stop and try to recreate on your own. So you have this nutrient pull that's being obtained from the catabolism of larger molecules like carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins that we have brought in from our digestive tract. So all of those things that we bring in our digestive tract create this nutrient pull. That nutrient pull is then rebuilt and reassembled into other things that our body needs. Enzymes, structural components, keratin, remember that protein that's in our hair and skin and fingernails, right? This nutrient pull can then be used to create energy in the form of ATP. This ATP energy is used for the cell to do work. Now remember, not all of that energy that's created from the formation of ATP is put into ATP, or I should say, not all of the energy that's released from the breakdown of other materials is put into ATP. Only 40% of it. The majority of it is lost as body heat. So, cool diagram there. You can pause the video here, go back and review this section. We're going to keep moving through this chapter and talk more specifically about this nutrient pool, this idea of a nutrient pool. So this is where all of the organic molecules for catabolism and anabolism come from. So anabolism, this is that building, right? This is required for everything, like I said, replacing cell membranes, building organelles, creating enzymes, structural proteins like keratin, collagen, elastic fibers. Remember all of those connective tissue ingredients, right? Hemoglobin, every protein, albumin, right? Every protein that we've learned along the way, fibrinogen, right? They've all have been created through an anabolic process that was using the nutrients your body took in. Catabolism in the cell is needed for creating ATP. So we take these larger molecules, like a glucose molecule, for example, and we break it down. And the energy that's released as we break that molecule down is captured, 40% of it is captured, in the form of an ATP molecule. Now, here's an important concept. It's a chemistry concept, so if you skip chemistry, or maybe it's been a while, remember that energy in all molecules is stored where? Where is energy in molecules stored? It's stored in the chemical bonds. Energy is stored in the chemical bonds of molecules. So when you break bonds of a molecule, you're releasing energy. That energy can then be captured in another molecule by bonding to, two atoms together, two other molecules together, or that energy can be used to do something, like pump something, move something, change something, right? Do a chemical reaction. So catabolism is necessary for ATP to be formed. Breaking molecules down is necessary for ATP to be formed. Where does ATP come from? ATP comes from ADP. Do yourself a favor. On your sheet of paper that hopefully you have in front of you as you're taking notes, write at the top part of your paper, just have like a little area. You're going to do a little drawing here. The top have the word ADP. At the bottom have the word ATP. So you have ATP, ADP, and ATP. Now draw an arrow from ADP to ATP and from ATP to ADP. So it's a cycle. Now, if you were to put the word release energy, which arrow would you put that on? Which arrow is releasing energy? It should be the arrow from ATP to ADP, because the cell will release energy when ATP is broken down into ADP. Now, what about energy being captured? Energy is captured when ADP is converted into ATP. Make sense? So there's one small ingredient that we didn't include on this little flow chart that you're creating, and that is the third P. ADP stands for adenosine diphosphate, meaning two phosphates. ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate. The phosphate doesn't really go anywhere. It just kind of pops on and off, right? Like a lid almost. So on your ADP, write plus P next to it, because ADP plus P will capture energy to form ATP. ATP will release energy to form ADP plus P. Yay! All right, let's take a look at some of these catabolic and anabolic pathways. It's color-coded here. You know what? I don't even suggest looking at this. I suggest creating your own diagram. Break it down. And that's what the next couple slides do. If you're not an artist, if you're limited on time, maybe you'll print out the next couple slides and try to paraphrase each of them. Let's take a look at them individually. Here, you have your nutrient pool. Remember, the nutrient pool is created from the organic components of our food that we absorbed into our blood. So when fats are brought into our body, all of those enzymes that we learned in the last chapter are breaking those fats down into fatty acids. All of the enzymes are breaking carbohydrates down to form glucose and monosaccharides. All of the enzymes we learned in the last chapter are breaking proteins down to form amino acids. So this nutrient pool is made of fatty acids, monosaccharides like glucose, and amino acids. So fatty acids can be converted and built into triglycerides. That's our stored, right? That's like this, it's a stuff that we have hanging on our body. Glucose can be compacted through anabolic reactions to make glycogen. Glycogen is a stored energy source. Amino acids can be put together through anabolic reactions to create proteins. What are proteins? You're looking at them. My skin, my hair, my eyes, right? Pigment, nails, all that stuff. Well, my nails are actually acrylic, but the nail underneath of them is made of protein. So all of those structures have been made through anabolic reactions from the nutrient pool. The nutrient pool we got from our digestive tract, and the catabolic reactions that broke down that food that we brought in. So we can then, our body, depending on, what we're doing, if we're using energy, if we need energy, or if we're just kind of loafing around, or if we're in a growing phase, right? Our body could take this nutrient pool, and instead of building triglycerides or glycogen or proteins, our body can actually use this nutrient pool to obtain ATP energy. And that's this catabolic pathway that we're going to learn all the details of in this chapter. Fatty acids, glucose, and amino acids can all be broken down and converted into other substrates that will allow us to obtain ATP energy from them. So this is the whole picture all put back together for you. So let's talk about how we get our metabolic reserves mobilized. So the reserves, our metabolic reserves, this is those triglycerides, this is the glycogen, this is all the stuff that's sitting around and not actively being used. This is our metabolic reserves, so to speak, are that top row of molecules in this diagram: triglycerides, glycogen, and proteins. These are all kind of stored forms of energy. So how do we mobilize them? How do we get them able to be converted into ATP? Well, if our digestive tract is insufficient in obtaining nutrients, if we're going in a starvation mode or fasting, our liver cells are going to break down triglycerides and glycogen to form fatty acids and glucose, right? Triglycerides will form fatty acids, glycogen will form glucose. Adipocytes are fat cells. Those are going to break down triglycerides and release fatty acids as well. Our skeletal muscles will actually start to break down the contractile proteins, the actin and myosin. Yeah, those ingredients are broken down during times of need, and the amino acids can be released and reused in the form of energy. We can also restore our metabolic reserves, pack them away. This is typically what's happening. So reserves are stocked when absorption by the digestive tract is greater than what we need, right? So what? I know I didn't really exercise in the past couple of months, but I'm going to eat that 4th slice of pizza, right? That's that. I'm guilty, so guilty. So liver cells are going to convert all of that stuff, all of the fatty acids, into triglycerides and glycogen. Our adipocytes are going to grab those excess fatty acids, store them away as triglycerides. And our skeletal muscles are going to build up glycogen reserves and use amino acids to create more myofibrils. That doesn't mean you're getting stronger. It doesn't mean you're building muscle mass. It means you're replacing the muscle mass that you may have lost, and that's it. You're not going to be gaining muscles. Unless you're using your muscles, right? Muscles live by the rule, you don't use it, you lose it. So if you're using your muscles, then they will increase in size, hypertrophy. So how are our nutrient reserves used? Well, the most of the cells in our tissues are basically swapping out glucose all the time, absorbing it, using it, converting it, releasing it, right there. It's this kind of dynamic equilibrium where it's this in and out state, right, of glucose in and out of the cells. Neural tissue has to have a continuous supply of glucose. Our neurons only use fatty acids. Any other tissue in our body can use fatty acids, but our nerve cells can only utilize glucose. Super important. So, which is why, like, for instance, around our heart, there's a lot of fatty deposits. If you've ever done a dissection before of a heart, you know that underneath that fibrous pericardium on top of the epicardium, there's lots and lots of fat. There's a backup energy reserve as well as insulation for our cardiocytes, just in case your blood glucose levels drop and your heart cardiocytes need a supply of energy. Those fatty acids can be used by the cardiocytes. So this is just an overall schematic of where things are going. You can start anywhere, right? I tend to look at the middle. Nutrients in the blood can go to the adipocytes, or the adipocytes can put nutrients into the blood. Same thing with liver cells, exchanging glycogen and triglycerides with the blood. Our skeletal muscles, exchanging proteins with the blood, amino acids with the blood. What I would do on this slide is I would write exactly which molecules are being exchanged from each of these tissues, right? So nutrient absorption through the digestion, that's all of them, right? Liver cells have specific adipocytes, tissue cells, they all have specific things, specific molecules that you can assign to those specific parts. So there are catabolic and anabolic pathways that we have to distinguish. Our cells have to synthesize some organic molecules. So sometimes we're not bringing in the correct nutrients, right? That's probably the case. Nutrients can often be used to create what we call a 2-carbon chain for mitochondrial ATP production. So if for some reason you don't have enough molecules coming into your body, enough nutrients for whatever reason, maybe you're on a special type of diet or you're fasting, your cells can actually create organic molecules from the nutrient pool that is inside. They'll create 2-carbon compounds. Oxygen is required to do this, and carbon dioxide will be produced from this. So these 2-carbon compounds are then used to create ATP. So we're going to learn how these 2-carbon compounds are produced. So this is your body needs energy. How are we going to get that energy? So first way is by breaking down glucose. So glucose can be stored. It's stored in the form of glycogen through a process called glycogenesis. So you have an excess of blood sugar, you have too much sugar in your blood, well then hormones will be released to tell your cells to suck up that extra blood sugar and start stacking it away in the form of glycogen. This happens in the liver and the skeletal muscles. So glucose can also be created from glycogenolysis. So you're actually breaking down the glycogen. Say you're on a low-carb diet, or say you are doing some type of training that requires lots and lots of glucose energy. Well, your blood sugar is going to drop, and therefore you're going to have to, your blood is going to need more glucose in it. How does it do that? It calls on the glycogen reserves, right? The glycogen reserves are in the liver and in the skeletal muscles. So the glycogen is going to be like pulled off the shelf, and little glucose molecules are going to be broken off of that. It's much more complicated, but that's the idea, and stuck into the blood. So you can break down glycogen to increase blood sugar. Smaller carbon chains can be broken down as well. That's called gluconeogenesis. That prefix neo that's in there means new. So we're basically making glucose from a new source, like an amino acid or a fatty acid. So ultimately, glucose is broken down through the process of glycolysis to form a 3-carbon molecule. So let's back up for a minute. Do you remember how many carbons is in a glucose molecule? Do you remember the chemical formula for glucose? It's C6H12O6. Glucose has 6 carbons in it. So this process of glycolysis is pretty much splitting a glucose molecule in half. I wish it was that simple. It's not, but that's the idea. You're taking a 6-carbon compound like glucose and you're breaking it in half to form 2 3-carbon compounds. So fatty acids can be stored as triglycerides. They can also be broken down or they can be created from the breakdown of triglycerides. So just like glycogen can be broken down to release glucose, triglycerides can be broken down to release fatty acids, and acetyl-CoA can form fatty acids as well. So fatty acids can be broken down and they can form acetyl-CoA. Acetyl-CoA is a substrate that we'll get to know very well in this chapter, but acetyl-CoA can either be converted back into a fatty acid, or fatty acids can convert into acetyl-CoA. So this is part of the natural catabolic process that creates ATP. It's called the citric acid cycle. So we'll get into it. This is just an overview of how these specific nutrients are used. Let's talk about amino acids. So amino acids can be stored as proteins. You bring lots of them in through your diet, and you can store them in the form of protein, make extra hair, skin, nails, enzymes, etc. They can also be broken down to form 3-carbon chains like glucose. This is the process of protein catabolism. This typically only happens during a starvation mode or when you're depriving your body of carbohydrates. And the reason is because in the process of protein catabolism, the breaking down of proteins, there's something that occurs that's called deamination. That's actually taking the nitrogen group off of the amino acid. If you remember, amino acids have like a carboxyl group and a central carbon and a nitrogen, right? Well, this nitrogen is taken off and it accumulates in the form of ammonia in our body, which is toxic. So our body prefers not to break down proteins unless it has to. So when your body gets to a state, a starvation state, where it is breaking down protein, your ammonia levels are going to increase, which can lower the pH of your blood, causing something called ketoacidosis. It's very dangerous. We'll talk about that more as we go. But in a starvation setting, your body can use protein as an energy source by creating these 2-carbon compounds that are then used to produce ATP. So here's the whole breakdown. And again, the next couple of slides break this into individual parts. This is showing you the exchange. Triglycerides and fatty acids can be made and broken down, right? Glycogen and glucose can be made and broken down. Proteins and amino acids can be made and broken down. Fatty acids can be converted into 3 carbon chains or 2 carbon chains. Glucose can be converted into 3 carbon chains. And likewise, these 3 carbon chains can be converted back into glucose, and so on and so forth. I think it would be awesome if you summarize these slides so that you can reinforce your terminology, because remember, in this course, knowing the vocabulary is crucial. You have to know the vocabulary and the differences between how these 3 nutrients are used in our body, because they're all very different. And this is what's going on. So no matter where it starts, it's all these molecules are ultimately going to be converted into a 2 carbon chain. These 2 carbon chains are stuck in the mitochondria as long as oxygen is present. Remember, oxygen has to be present. If oxygen is present, these 2 carbon chains can go to the mitochondria and release a large amount of ATP and water and carbon dioxide. So there's the whole nutshell. And I'm going to stop the video here to give you a chance to metabolize all of this information. And you can answer these 3 questions and have an awesome day.